paranormal. It surrounds us. It's everywhere. Tonight, you will hear from the people who live and work within these highly active locations, all in the efforts to discover America's most haunted. With your host, ghost hunter and author, Dan Terry.
All right, boys and ghouls. So without any further ado about my adventures in this place, I'm going to bring you straight to the expert on the Illinois Asylum for the Incurably Insane. And that is Sylvia Shults. Sylvia, would you join me?
Hey, Dan, I am here and I am ready to chat about the asylum.
Well, now you tend to refer to it as the Peoria Asylum. Did it have a name change in there?
It did. It had a couple of name changes. At the very beginning, it started off as, like you said, the Illinois Asylum for the Incurable Insane. The first superintendent, Dr. George Zeller, was very cognizant of the rights of the mentally ill, and he realized that he had a mandate to care for these people, and he actually went to the state capitol in Springfield and talked to the legislators there and said, you have to change the name of this place. Don't tell my patients they're incurable. That's what I'm here to do. That makes sense. There were a couple of changes. Yeah, I mean, if you go into a place that's called the Asylum for the Incurable Insane, what hope do you have? It's just awful. But he said, let's change the name. So it eventually became the Peoria State Hospital. It was a state hospital, so that was appropriate. And Peoria is the largest city to it. Mm-hmm. So they decided to go with the name Peoria because it was familiar to everyone, even though it is actually in Bartonville, Illinois.
And from my understanding, and when I was in there, the building was so amazingly dilapidated that we were walking on plywood over holes on the third floor. It was more frightening than any ghost I was going to come across.
Yes. You're referring to the Bowen building, which is the administration building for many years.
And do I understand it's gone now? It's been torn down?
It has been taken down, yes. We were devastated to lose that building. It was so beautiful. And it had good bones, too. If they had just taken the floors out and replaced the roof, that building would have stood for another 100 years.
But how many millions would that have cost?
Well, see, that's the thing, is money talks. So, yeah, but we did lose the Bowen building. There are still 12 buildings of the asylum complex left on the hilltops. Okay. And none of those, thankfully, are in danger of being lost. So we've still got those 12.
Now, looking out the front door of the Bowen building, there was a building kind of across the street or down the hill. And the guys I was with, I was there as a guest of the Gateway Paranormal team who'd done it before. They said the legends coming out of that building was even more scary than what I was going to deal with in here. Is that is that what you've heard? Okay.
Absolutely.
That was like some kind of medical building at that time, wasn't it? Yes, when I was there?
I was going to say, I'm reasonably certain you're referring to the Pollock Hospital, which the Bowen building was nurses' classrooms and a nurses' dormitory at the beginning. And then in the 1960s, it was remodeled into an administration building. Mm-hmm. So not much. I mean, a lot of learning happened in there, and a lot of nurses' sleepovers happened in there, but not anything that would cause a great deal of haunting. The Pollock Hospital, on the other hand, was the tuberculosis ward, and that was built in the 1950s, late 1950s, as a purpose-built as a tuberculosis ward. And before that, there was another hospital on that site, a Batwing shaped hospital, and that kind of almost overlaps the footprint of the Pollock Hospital. And even before that, there were tent colonies set up. So the tuberculosis patients could be out kind of in the open air and get that fresh air into their lungs.
Okay.
And that started at the very beginning in 1902 when the asylum first. So people have been dying of tuberculosis on that plot of land for a very, very long time. So the Pollock Hospital is incredibly active, much more active than the Bowen ever was.
Okay, yeah, okay. I did get some contact, but I'd like to talk about the Pollock Hospital because I've heard stories. What have you come across with this?
Oh my goodness. The Pollock Hospital holds a very special place in my heart. I have developed a friendship with one of the spirits in the Pollock Hospital, a young man named Christopher, and he prefers to go by Chris. For a long time, it started off with him holding my hand during an investigation. My hand got warm, and obviously there was something going on. But I am not sensitive. I don't see dead people. I don't hear dead people, unfortunately. So I knew there was somebody who was interested in communicating, but I could not communicate back with him. And it was frustrating for both of us, I'm sure. And then I visited the Pollock with a dear friend of mine, Diane, and she is a powerful medium. And she actually facilitated several conversations between Chris and myself, where I learned more about him. He learned more about me. I brought some ragtime music. He said that the last year he remembered was 1906, I think it was. So I brought some ragtime music, and I taught myself a ragtime dance. So we danced together. And there's a part in the dance where the woman spins backward, and I, being a dork and not a very good dancer, spun forward. And Diane started laughing, and she called from across the room. She said, "He says you're trying to lead." So yes, Chris and I have had delightful times together with Diane's help as kind of an interpreter. Mm-hmm. So yeah, he holds a very special place in my heart, and I remind him of his sister. So okay. I've been told that he loves me, and not in any sort of romantic way, but he compliments me. He says I'm pretty, which is always nice to hear. And yeah, I remind him of his sister. So that's wonderful. Now, this is something that's going to come as a very interesting thing to a lot of people when we do the EVPs. We listened to a couple of EVPs. I included an EVP that I caught regarding Chris.
Okay.
Diane's down in the basement of the Pollock with me, and she said she was describing him. She said he was 20. He was young, pretty. She said he was a young guy, about 22 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And then we caught an EVP that seemed to say, it was a female voice responding to us, saying he was 22. And Diane heard that, and she thought it was wonderful because she considered that validation of her psychic gifts. Sure. Well, our wonderful producer on this show, Race Hobbs, actually played with the EVP, and he did something. He told me about it. He said he put it through a filter that removes the standing static wave.
Okay.
And what he got was much different. And we'll play those EVPs a little later on. And yeah, what he got was far different than he was 22. And it's a little hair-raising, but it's still communication, which...
Well, you know, I heard Ray sent it to me, his deal. Yeah. And boy, I'm still hearing he was, and then there's a gap, and then 22.
Yeah.
I still heard that. But hey, Race, could you play that for us so we can discuss it some more?
Yeah, I'd say about 22, but yeah, I'd say about 22, but
Now I still hear he was, and then in a lower, maybe slightly rougher voice, she says, as if she's getting hoarse, 22.
Yeah.
Are you hearing something different?
Well, that's what I have been hearing for a couple of years, ever since I
Mhm.
captured this EVP. And it makes sense that the voice would be a little hoarse. Our theory is that it is the spirit of Rhoda Derry coming through, who is another beloved spirit on the hilltop. And I do still hear that he was 22.
Mhm.
But with the filter, what Race and I both heard, he played it for me a little earlier. We heard someone saying, "I'm coming. Um, I just wanted you to know. I just want you to know." Something like that.
Okay.
So this is what fascinates me. Paranormal investigators are always trying to improve our craft, trying to improve the quality of the evidence we capture. And
Mhm.
new developments are happening all the time. And this filter is part of a new program that Adobe put out. And it's just fascinating to me that we have one EP that seems to say something, and then we have another EP that says something really entirely different
Mhm.
through the filter. So
Hmm.
we're
We're gonna
just
have to
getting,
work on that one.
yeah,
That's pretty.
it's interesting. Yeah.
I was talking to a spirit. I am not psychic either. I use dowsing rods, and they can
Ah,
move it, and that's awesome. She
yeah.
said she was a woman who was dropped off there during the Depression,
Hmm.
and my wife was actually there with me and said something about, "Are you? Was you just dropped off there because of the free meals and room and board?" And I said, because I was the one talking with her, "Did
Hmm.
you have mental problems or was you dropped off for convenience?" And basically she said, "No, no, I had problems."
Oh, bless her heart.
And I don't know her name. I asked her if I could call her Sue. She said yes. And I had a lengthy discussion with her.
That's
What,
awesome.
what do you think happens to that spirit, to Sue and the others, when that building came down?
Oh, well, I really think that they are attached to the land more than anything else, more than to a specific building.
Okay.
That hilltop was it was its own little community. It
Mhm.
was a definite geographic place. It was the hilltop. It was very compact. The patients were allowed to wander wherever they wanted to on the hilltop. They were not locked in.
Mhm.
There were no bars on the windows, and they were allowed to roam fairly freely. So they were allowed to explore the hilltop. So I think that any spirit that happens to be lingering there is there, first of all, because they were welcome
Mhm.
and because they were cared for, and also because they have the experience of being all over the place, not confined to one building.
Right. The graveyard that's on that property.
Yes.
I was told it was very haunted, but I was not able to get back there at night. And
Right.
daytime, I'll bet I took 300 photos out there, but
Uh-huh.
there was some that was so impersonal, they actually just had numbers on the
That's correct.
gravestones.
Yes, and that bothers a lot of people. It bothered me too until I found the reason for it.
Okay.
Illinois state law says that you cannot put a name on a headstone unless it's the person's legal name. And some of the people that came to us, we didn't know their names. They went by
Hmm.
nicknames. So we were not able to put their legal name on a headstone. It's also a matter of privacy, too. If
Hmm.
your Aunt Joan is in the asylum and died there, you might not want people coming up and saying, "Oh, hey, look, there's Fred's Uncle Bob." That's boy,
Yeah.
I heard stories, but here it is.
I had
Uh,
never heard that. That is a good theory.
yeah, yeah, it's a patient
That
privacy
makes
issue
sense.
too. Yeah,
Okay.
and if people's if if people's families wanted them buried on the hilltop, which many of them were, there are 4,132 graves on the hilltop in 4 different cemeteries. If you wanted to provide your loved one with a headstone, then absolutely shell out the money and put a headstone. That more power to you.
Okay.
These people are remembered by their actual names. Many of them are not. But we do have in the Peoria State Hospital Museum, we have what we refer to as the Book of the Dead, which is a lot of the records of who is buried where and their actual names. So we have about a 75% success rate of finding people's loved ones where they are buried on the ground.
Really? That's surprisingly high.
Mm-hmm.
You have written, what, 2 or 3 books just about that subject? 3.
Yeah.
So you're really intrigued with the folks who are being cared for there.
Oh, I am. I adore the Peoria State Hospital. I have every respect in the world, all the love in the world for Dr. Zeller and for the people that he cared for, too.
Mm-hmm. The lady who took us through in the beginning, before she let us take off and ghost hunt, was telling us there was folks working there, and apparently it was Dr. Zeller who took over later in time and said, we're not treating people this way, and fired anyone who couldn't treat them like family, is the way she said it.
Exactly, yes.
Where did he come from, and what made him so more open-hearted?
Well, it's very interesting. Dr. Zeller kind of grew up around this area, a little north of here, along the Peoria River. I'm sorry, the Illinois River. He grew up north of Peoria. And his father was a surgeon. And Dr. Zeller was also trained as a surgeon. He served as a surgeon in the army in the Philippines during the Spanish-American War. Mm-hmm. And when he came back, actually before he left, he was invited to be the superintendent of the Peoria State Hospital. And when he came back from service, that's when he started his service at the Peoria State Hospital. He was not trained as a psychiatrist. He did not have any mental health training, which was fine, because mental health training at that time, at the beginning of the 20th century, was no great shakes at all. So he was really proud of the fact that he did not have psychiatric training. He felt that he was not hidebound by the current best practices of treating the mentally ill. He said, how about this? Let's treat them like family. Let's treat them like human beings and see what happens. Let's not lock them in. Let's not restrain them, and we'll see what happens. And what happened was that the Peoria State Hospital became the premier institution for the care of the mentally ill in the world. So that's why its history and its legacy reverberates today.
Was there a time, though, when they did do shock treatments and surgery and all the things that we find just distasteful now to try and cure this?
Here's the thing. After Dr. Zeller passed away in 1936, there were fewer than 24 lobotomies performed on the hilltop. Mm-hmm. Even after Dr. Zeller's death, his legacy remained, and his legacy was one of where you don't restrain.
Non-invasive.
Non-restraint. My policy of non. And if you have, and he was also very interested in having women be the caretakers. He felt that the soft touch of a woman was much better for the mentally ill than the hard hand of a man. So if you have some 250-pound, 6'4" mental patient that has the mental capacity of an 8th grader, and he's very violent, and you don't want to keep him drugged up, if you want him to have a quality of life, and he's very violent, you turn to the most drastic method you have, which is lobotomization. And that severs the connections in the brain, and it severs the connections that make the violence. So they did perform fewer than 24 lobotomies, and it was in those extreme cases where they wanted people to have quality of life, but they wanted to also protect their staff from being attacked.
Okay, well,
And
I can't argue with it. It's just so barbarian.
it is, and that's the limitations of mental health care in the mid 20th century, even that late. People were treated with electroshock therapy. They're treated with electroshock therapy now, but the difference at the Peoria State Hospital is usually electroshock treatment involves strapping the patient down on a table, sticking electrodes on their head, and zapping them with no warning, no anesthesia at all. And people broke bones because of the tremors that they went through, the convulsions that they went through. At the Peoria State Hospital, when a patient required electroshock therapy, they were injected with insulin and put into an insulin coma so that their body would be relaxed for the electroshock. So they wouldn't go into convulsions, so they wouldn't break bones. And then when the electroshock therapy had been administered, they were gently brought out of the coma and showed improvement because they'd had that jolt to the brain, but it wasn't a jolt to the body as well.
Well, as you said, I understand it was the times. It was part of that time period, but it's still in my 21st century mind is just barbaric. There's no other word for it.
We like to think that we're better than that, but the Peoria State Hospital was extremely progressive in their treatment.
So what other spirits? I came across several, including we had a conversation with a boy who said the other one was his brother down in the basement where the toys were left. Did you come across any spirits like that?
Oh, I have certainly heard of child spirits being at the Peoria State Hospital, and that makes perfect sense. It did serve a younger population too. The Grace Abbott Children's Home was a facility for treating the very youngest and most vulnerable mentally ill patients. So yeah, there were siblings there.
And I understand there was even children there born right there on the grounds.
Absolutely, especially at the very beginning of the asylum's history, because Dr. Zeller became the superintendent and he threw the doors open. He wrote to the superintendents of poorhouses and workhouses and other facilities that had an overflow, and he said, "Send us your worst cases." I said before, he felt that he had a mandate to treat the worst of the worst. He wanted those patients. He wanted to help those wretched, abused cases. So he said, "Send them to me, send them to us." And a lot of our female patients came to us from workhouses, from poorhouses, from county farms where there was no oversight. And there was sexual abuse, there was sexual contact. A lot of them came to us pregnant, and they were allowed to give birth at the Peoria State Hospital. And they were also allowed to care for their children as much as they could, as much as they were able to, until the children were 2 years old. The staff and Dr. Zeller adored babies. So the women were encouraged to keep their children with them until the age of 2 years old. And at that time, if the patient was not capable of caring for her child, the children were taken to Peoria and either sent to blood relatives or put up for adoption.
Again, it's heartbreaking. It really is.
And there were other children there too. There were children of staff members that the staff members brought their kids to work with them on a regular basis. So yeah,
So,
they're children all over the place.
well, then that may have helped keep people calm too.
Oh,
I don't know.
absolutely. Yeah, I think
So,
so.
tell me about some more of the hauntings you dealt with in there.
Oh boy. There are experiences that I've had, and there have been experiences that people have shared with me. Two of the books that I have written have been people telling me their stories, and I've just been ever so grateful for all of that,
Mm-hmm.
all of that talk. Um, there's one. Speaking of children in the asylum, there was a there was a guy and his wife and his mother-in-law who were on a tour of the Pollock Hospital. And he was in the women's ward. And earlier, his wife and mother-in-law were both sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
And the mother-in-law kept saying, "Oh my goodness, there are so many children here. There's so many children spirits running around."
Uh-huh.
So they had that confirmation about the presence of children spirits. And the fellow told me that he was in the women's ward and he heard a tap on the window. And he said aloud, he was recording, he said aloud, "Did I just hear somebody tap on the window next to me?" And he caught a child's voice saying, "Yep, you sure did," which is just delightful. And someone else shared an EVP with me that they captured in one of the cemeteries. Now, I think this was Cemetery 3-4. They were doing a cemetery tour, and this fellow was recording, of course, and someone on the tour asked, "Why is this place so haunted?" I mean, we're used to mental asylums being haunted because of abuse and pain and
Right.
fear, and this was not the case. So somebody asked, "Why is this place so, why do the spirits hang around?" And before the tour guide could even open her mouth to answer, the recorder caught a voice saying, "They're just so nice here."
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
We have
I
another
was,
EVP. We have another EVP you shared with us. Can you set that up for
yes.
us?
Oh boy, yeah, this does take a little bit of setup. This was when the Bowen was still standing, and it was during a period of about 18 months or so when no one could go into the Bowen because of the asbestos. They were working on
Okay.
the abatement. So no one was in the building at that time. But it was the beginning of October. And the weekend they decided to do this whole ghost hunt was also the very first weekend that the Pollock Hospital held their very first haunted house. And they did it every Friday and Saturday in October. And that's that's the year that started.
I'm
So
sorry I missed that.
right? So the Bowen people said, "All right, so the Pollock people are doing this, that's fine." And the Bowen people said, "Well, no one can go in the building, but let's invite people for a public ghost hunt. Whoever shows up, we'll split them into 4 groups, and they can rotate between the outside of the Bowen and the 3 cemeteries." Well, 200 people showed up for this investigation. So you have 200 people, well, 50 at a time, roaming the grounds of the Bowen, and then you have lines down the block at the Pollock Hospital, which is only a block away. So that little corner of Bartonville was just crowded with people. So I happened to find myself, this is when I was working on Fractured Spirits, the first book about the asylum. And I made it known that I was collecting stories. I had my recorder going and I had a notebook, and people were coming up to me and sharing their stories, which was wonderful. I appreciate every single one of them. And it happened that I was at the back of the Bowen, and it was just me and another guest and the then caretaker of the Bowen, the lady you talked to. Mm-hmm. And we were seeing things like, the girl was going to leave and drive home to Bloomington. It was about an hour away. And we were saying things like, glad you could make it, safe travels, have a good drive home, stuff like that. It was three women talking.
Okay.
And I was still recording. But underneath those three female voices, you hear a man's voice. And I felt so bad because...
Okay, Sylvia, can you start again with, it was a man's voice, because we lost you after that.
Oh, okay. So under the three female voices talking, you hear a man's voice. And I felt so bad for him because he sounded very distressed. He said, "There's too many people here. There's too many people here." And I could just picture someone just wringing his hands in distress that there's so many people around him that he just couldn't handle it. And what's interesting about this EVP, when you listen to it, is most EVPs, as you know, just come through as whispers. But this actually has a tone underneath it. It's fascinating.
Okay, so it's right at the beginning of the clip you sent, and you all are talking, and then there's that voice that says what he says about too many people.
Yeah.
Okay, Race, would you hit that for me?
This is what I paid you for.
Okay, one more time, please, Race.
This is what I paid you for.
That's one of the best EVPs I've heard. That's incredible.
Oh man, me too. I was listening to this tape for the first time, this recording for the first time in a bar that happened to be haunted. I was just by myself and listening to the recording and taking notes, and my jaw hit the counter. I had no idea I had captured such a brilliant EVP.
No, that one's amazing. Race, would you play that one for us one more time? And folks, it's right at the beginning. It's hard to catch if you're not expecting it.
I'm going to jump in here and just say that he repeats himself. You can actually hear it twice.
Oh, now I've missed that.
Right, Sylvia?
Yep. Yeah, he says it twice.
Okay, here we go.
This is what I paid you for.
Wow, I totally missed that.
Yeah, yeah.
So would you say then that main building, the one that I spent like 12 hours in or something, is not the most haunted building there?
Oh, not by a long shot. Not by a long shot.
Now, I didn't get anything earth-shattering. I didn't get any big, huge, great EVPs, but there was definite action in there.
Oh, yeah.
The basement and the top floor.
There's a very famous, well-known ghost hunter, Dale Kazmarek, who's a friend of mine, and he was giving a talk at a convention about the Peoria State Hospital, and he and his team had explored the Bowen, and he was describing an EVP that they caught in the basement, and they had been told that, oh, this is the morgue and it's super haunted and everything, and what his team caught was a woman's giggle. And he said during his talk, "Oh, I don't know why we caught the sound of a woman's laughter in the morgue, this huge spooky place." And I came up to him after his talk and I said, "Dale, I'm going to let you in on a secret. This is why you captured the woman's giggle." I said, "There was not a morgue in the basement of the dormitory. That's just silly. There were plenty of morgues on site. They were in the hospital buildings. They weren't in the nurses' dormitory. However, in the basement of the nurses' dormitory was the pantry. And I have talked to nurses who have told me about sneaking out of their rooms at night to go down the hill to the bar at the bottom of the hill and raid the pantry for like a can of peaches or something." So I said, "Dale, what you heard was the sound of a little nurse getting away with something." And he said, "Oh, that makes much more sense."
Now, I don't remember anyone telling me there was a morgue when we were
Oh,
in that
okay.
building.
They always made a big deal about it when I was in there. So
Mhm.
yeah,
What years was you in there?
I made my first visit to the Bowen basement or the Bowen building, the whole thing, in 2009
Okay.
because it appears in my first book of ghost stories, Ghosts of the Illinois River, which was published in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Okay.
that was my first visit. It was 2009.
Yeah, I think I was there in 2015, and like I
Okay.
said, just one good time, and then later on they tore the building down. I was crushed because
Yeah.
it was a very neat looking building. Very.
Oh, it looks like it has every right to be haunted. It's a
Oh
gorgeous.
yeah. I didn't want to use the word Gothic, but really it was a very Gothic looking building.
It was, yes. And Dr. Zeller got so much flack for building that building.
Mhm.
People were like, why are you pouring so much money into a building that's just going to be a college for nurses?
Mhm.
And again, beginning of the 20th century, women didn't even have the right to vote yet. And he said, you know what? If I put together this beautiful building, young ladies will want to come and be trained as nurses. And that's exactly what happened. It was the premier nurses' college for the field of mental health and nursing in general for 36 years.
Okay.
So, and he also encouraged nurses to go on to become doctors in their own right. He would go around to high school classrooms and lecture to the classes of young ladies there. And he would say, if you want to be a nurse, you can do anything you want. He said, if you want to be a nurse, come to my college and I will train you to be a nurse and care for these people. You want to be a doctor? Go ahead. You want to be a lawyer? Do that. He was very encouraging of women.
In the 1930s, that's practically a heretic.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
So, does the name Pearl mean anything to you? Because they were talking about a spirit named Pearl. And I'd asked, and the spirit I was talking to said that she was not Pearl.
Okay.
But then can I call you Sue? And she said yes, and I called her Sue after that. But the team that was there with me said, look for Pearl because she's the main one.
Okay.
And did you ever come across her in particular?
I did not run across a spirit named
Okay.
Pearl, but that's a lovely old-fashioned name, so I'm quite certain there was a Pearl there at some point.
Yeah, and she just didn't want to talk to me, I guess. I don't know. So your books, what are they? What's the titles? Where can people find them? Because the idea of the science and history of treating insanity is intriguing to a lot of folks.
Oh, yes. And I am so privileged to share this incredible history. So the first book in the Asylum series is Fractured Spirits.
Mm-hmm.
And when I typed the end on Fractured Spirits, people didn't stop having experiences out there. So after a few years, I had enough material collected to make the second book in the series called Fractured Souls. So those are the two books in the Asylum series so far. And then there's another book about one of the patients in the asylum, a woman named Rhoda Derry. And that is 44 Years in Darkness.
Now, that is not ghost related at all. It's
mostly history. History. And then the very last section is all of Rhoda's ghost lore and the experiences people have had with her. Rhoda is one of our most beloved spirits, so I had to put her ghost lore into her book.
And which building is she normally in?
She loved that entire hilltop so much that she can be sensed at anywhere on the hilltop. Mm-hmm. The place she has probably felt most often is at her grave. She is buried on the hilltop in Cemetery 1. She actually did pass away in Dining Hall A, which is still standing. It's one of the 12 buildings that is still left. You can't, pardon me. That's one of the buildings we can't get into right now, but it is still standing. And oh boy, I would give a lot to be able to try to contact Rhoda Derry in dining hall A. Someday it'll happen. Someday I'll get in there.
Well, I'm sure she's waiting for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure she's waiting for you because you know quite a bit about her, apparently. And how did your interest in her start?
Well, I heard her story, and it was so compelling and so amazing that I knew she needed her own book. And I'm very, very fond of Rhoda, and I'm told she is very fond of me. Again, I was with Anne, my resident psychic, out at Rhoda's grave. I had some news for her about her story, and this news I can't share yet with all of you, but I shared it with Rhoda. And Diane said that Rhoda came up to me and gave me a big hug. The news was so wonderful that she wanted to acknowledge that. I didn't feel the hug, unfortunately, but Diane says that, and I've had other psychic mediums tell me this too, that Rhoda absolutely loves me for telling her story. And I always say, I am so grateful to be able to share your story. So, yeah.
And
Rhoda
her
and I get along
story,
just
how did you get started with that? Is it something that she said, or did you find records about it?
I found a lot of records. Her story is one of the most well-known stories on the hilltop. I'm sorry that we don't have time to go into it right now, but in a nutshell, she was perfectly normal and perfectly sane, and until a great change happened in her life. And after that change, she was abandoned by her family. She thought she was cursed. She spent 44 years basically locked in a cage in a poorhouse. And what did she do to deserve this treatment? She fell in love. It was that love affair that led to all this trouble in her life. So, yeah. You got a story like that, you have to tell it.
44 years in darkness. That sounds like a story a lot of people's going to want to read.
I hope so. I hope you explore Rhoda's story because it is fascinating.
Okay. Well, I know you've got to go, and I'm sorry we didn't have a little more time here today, but what would you say is the main takeaway from the Peoria Hospital? I won't use the incurably insane words, but from the Peoria Hospital, what's the main takeaway you have from that?
The main takeaway is that, you think of mental hospitals, especially haunted mental asylums like Pennhurst and places like that, and your mind goes all American Horror Story on you, and you assume that there was pain and fear and abuse. And it is my privilege and my joy to tell people that was not the case at the Peoria State Hospital. This was a place of safety. This was a place of refuge. This was a place where people came to feel safe again, to get refuge from the demons in their own mind. And so many of our patients went home and picked up their lives again. And if they couldn't, if they were too badly damaged, they were allowed to live at the Peoria State Hospital for the rest of their lives. They had a home there. So that's why it is so intensely haunted, is because of the good kind of haunting. These people are home.
And I have no way of saying from the time I was in there was nothing evil, mean. And I've been to some of the other hospitals where the spirits some of them were very angry and very aggressive. We was in a hallway down in the basement of that building, and there was 4 of us along the hall, spread out. And I was actually just going over the evidence last night before this. And I said to the guy running Gateway Paranormal team, Brandon Klein, I said, Brandon, something just grabbed my hand and squeezed it.
Nice.
And I said, well, thank you. I appreciate your being here, but would you please go over and touch Brandon's hand? He's right over the next guy down. And probably a minute or two later, he yelped and he said, something just touched me. But it was nothing me. I mean, they did what I asked them to do.
Yeah.
And it was an amazing time in that place. Like I said, I've been to places
so
with much more crazy, much more intense. But these spirits was like welcoming me to their home. And now I understand why. I did not
Yes.
know all of that background until talking to you, Sylvia. So thank you for coming in.
Oh, Dan, you're entirely welcome. I'm so glad you had a good experience.
Someday I'll get some more of that evidence together and send it to you. We played
Oh, I'd
some
love
before
that.
you came on. And it was, again, I've got to go through it over. It's been like 7 years, but
Well,
that-
you know what? I will put you in the 3rd volume of the Asylum series. I'm still collecting stories. We now have a museum, a very fine museum, and we also have one of the men's cottages that is open for investigation. I've already collected a couple stories from there, so I'll
Okay.
put you in my next book.
Well, if I could take just another minute, where's the museum now since they tore down that big building there?
Well, the first museum was in the firehouse, which was the first building built on the hilltop, as a matter of
Okay.
fact. And now the museum is located now there is kind of a complex of buildings that was it was kind of the library and the entertainment complex. There's a gymnasium there and a place where people could go for recreation.
Okay.
And it's one of those buildings. The gymnasium is now like a dance hall bar sort of thing. One of the other buildings of that complex is Club Phoenix, a restaurant, and another one of those buildings that was a lawyer's office there, and the lawyer moved out, so now the museum is in there. So it's one of the entertainment, the recreation buildings.
Well, I had no idea there was a little gift shop there, and that was it when I was there. So
Oh,
people can
yeah.
actually come and learn about this place, and that's awesome.
The Bowen people kind of kept to themselves. They had the little gift shop, and they had the Bowen building, and they didn't really have much to do with the rest of the asylum. So now that the Bowen has been torn down, people are concentrating more on the other buildings. So I'm just so grateful that we have those other buildings, and that the museum is incredible.
Well, Sylvia Shults, and you're the author of 44 Years in Darkness, which is the book I'm going to have to get hold of because that sounds amazing, but also Fractured Spirits and Fractured Souls.
Yes.
And that's just about this complex, this asylum.
Yes.
Okay. Is there any other books you want to talk about before we let you go?
Oh, absolutely. So last September, I released a book called Days of the Dead, A Year of True Ghost Stories. And that actually ended up winning first place in the Book Fest Awards. So I'm pretty proud of that.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. And then just last month, my latest book went live. It's called Grave Deeds and Dead Plots. And that is true crime stories with associated hauntings. And I started writing on that, and I have enough material for 5 volumes. It's the first in a series.
Now, is this all based in Illinois then?
No, it's worldwide.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll have to send you a copy of my book, Too Ornery to Die, because it's all about similar cases. So, all right. Well, Silly, like I said,
oh, that sounds great. Here we are.
There we are. Yeah, we're coming in and out there. So, again, thanks to Sylvia Shults for coming in and talking with us. That place, when I was there, was amazing. And I was only in one building. And again, the building was in very bad shape as far as floors. But the spirits there were happy. I don't get me wrong. I've dealt with a lot of happy spirits in my research and in my ghost hunting, but never in a insane asylum or prison or anything like that. There were happy spirits in these places, but overall, I dealt with more anger or resentment or confusion, but not there. So now we know why. That's incredible. Sylvia Shults. And for those of you who are still not listening to me, you have got to become a member of UnX Network. You don't know what you're missing. I know this week alone with the blog, which you would get for free, UFOs over big cities in Missouri. There was discussion of some kind of craft, it looks like, that was photographed between the Earth and the sun during a flare. And some even believe that that was there to help stop a lot of the electromagnetic problems that could be associated with a flare, because it was parked right between us and the sun, right between the Earth and the sun. So there is so much that comes out on those blogs, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. There was a case of a animal mutilation involving a rabbit, beheaded, no blood, no marks of predators, no footprints, just like the old animal mutilation cases. That was in the blog. And this was all in like a 2 or 3 day period. Folks, if you're missing out on the blog, it's free. All you got to do is go to unxnetwork.com, scroll down the first page till you see become a member, and become a member. You get free access to the blog. You get a monthly newsletter. And of course, the UnX magazine. And this next magazine, which will be coming out in late September or October, is mostly ghosts and spirits. You've got to do this. You are missing out on so much free stuff. And again, the quarterly UnX magazine is sent to you free digitally, so it shows up in your email and you can keep up on the stuff. And come on, the UnX Network is your home base for weird. It's, if you're into cryptids, ghosts, UFOs, aliens, abductions, possessions, whatever you're into, the stories are there. So come on over and join us, okay? And for that, I will step back and wish you a really, really good evening and stay spooked. Good night.